peaceful, prosperous, enjoyable. I'm going to do 4, and sustainable. I think the biggest issue facing Canadian cities now is to effectively create the space for transition to low carbon economy, to inclusive growth, to institutional adaptation. We require a lot of flexibility in our cities. Our regulatory regimes are not yet adapted to allow change to happen at the speed or scale that we require them. One great example that comes out of Montreal is the Art Hive movement. These are creative spaces that are mushrooming up in low-income neighborhoods, initially in Montreal, but now around the world, often linked to an art school or a creative agency of some kind, and they create open and free access to the means of creative production for people living in low-income neighborhoods. The quality of the work, the civic engagement, the joy of that people experience when they take part go to these places that are like libraries, but libraries of creative tools and spaces. And they're spreading across Europe, States, Australia. They started with one in Montreal, and I think they're part of this movement to create better outcomes, better quality of life for people on the margins in the low-income neighborhoods where it's often difficult to afford the things that many of us just take for granted. Another great example of this is the Community Food Centre movement, which began in Toronto, which is transforming food banks into community resources for gardening, for sharing diverse foods from different cultural organizations, pizza ovens, places for children to come and learn how to grow food, community gardens, and so on, all attached to what was once just the idea of giving free food, often not very good quality, to people who didn't have enough. So transforming a charitable service into a community asset is, I think, a really great example of what can happen. I'll give you one more, which is we have so many empty buildings in our cities which cost money to heat, insure, maintain, and while they're empty, actually depress real estate values around them. In Montreal, the city, working with an organization called Entremise, has done an inventory of those public assets and is now populating them with community-driven, community-led initiatives, innovations, startups, creative projects, and so on. I think the city in 50 years is going to be radically different from what we have today. It's going to be ecosystemic in that its processes will more closely mimic or reflect those of natural biology. Cities where natural capital is preserved means that they'll be greener. They will have natural systems for handling wastewater or preventing the extremes of weather to be so damaging. They'll be better linked to their surrounding rural areas. I think we want to break down the divide between center, sort of big metropolitan areas and the surrounding areas that support them. So in addition to the natural capital piece, I think the human capital piece in cities is going to look very different. I think the cities that we imagine in the future will be cities that children thrive in, and they're able to travel safely across the cities and experience them as full citizens in a way that they're not now. So we've got the human capital, the natural capital, and the social capital is really, we have to think about, and I think we're going to see an expanded and reimagined civic commons. So places for public enjoyment of the city, for sharing, learning, experiencing, participating in cultural projects and activities and so on, are really going to be something that we can see it now, we can get there, but I think in 50 years we'll be thriving on that count too.